Hello and welcome to today's lecture on ancient marsupials. So the objective of this lecture is to explore the rise, radiation and diversification of Australia's marsupials through evolutionary time. You will be provided with a synopsis of the current paleoecologic and paleobiogeographic understanding that we currently have of ancient marsupials. From information provided in this lecture, you should be able to gain an understanding of the various traits and features of the ancient marsupials and be able to interpret why these features have evolved. You should acquire knowledge of the evolutionary origins of different marsupial families and learn what contributed to their demise or success. And you should appreciate the role that the paleo environment and especially the paleoclimate, as well as the niche occupancy, had on the evolutionary history of the Australian marsupials. So why is paleontology important? Basically, this area has three basic goals. So it's to describe the world's past biodiversity, it's to outline the history of life on Earth, and it also helps in facilitating the development of new ideas about evolution and ecology. So by examining these evolutionary histories of species, we can look at and understand the consistencies and similarities of different patterns that will reveal processes of evolution and ecology that have kind of shaped the pattern of life's history, as well as those species that exist today. So we can combine this information that we have with the Earth's physical changes in climate, the atmospheric chemistry, as well as shifts in the continental positions through time, and understand how living organisms have been impacted by this physical change, and again how it's shaped the existing species that we have today. So paleontology is very relevant to the modern world as well as the future world. It teaches us how we can better understand the principles of extinction, evolutionary change, and appreciate our current biodiversity. So knowing how climate especially has affected past life can lead to understanding these potential changes in future ecosystems, which is particularly relevant as we face a very uncertain future in the climate that's arising. So just a couple of definitions and acronyms that pop up during the lecture. So paleontology, as you probably know by now, is the branch of science that's concerned with fossil animals and plants. If you see the abbreviation MA, this means million years ago. Species nova refers to a new species. Inserte sedis means of uncertain placement. So this is when a taxonomic group, it's unknown about the relationships of a taxonomic group in relation to other taxonomic groups. In terms of classifying species and organising the phylogeny of species, there are a few terms that you should be aware of. So the crown group, which is represented here in pink, this is the smallest clade that includes all living members of a group, and as well as any fossils that belong to it. The stem group is a set of distinct taxa that are not in the crown group but are more closely related to the crown group than any other group. And then the total group is represented there in purple. So this is all the crown and stem groups that are related. So there's a number of Australian mammal-bearing fossil deposits. It seems like a lot based on these two figures. So we have one for the tertiary deposits as well as the Pleistocene deposits. But there's actually, as you'll notice, quite a conspicuous gap in terms of deposits that we have here in Western Australia. So there's practically no tertiary deposits, and there's relatively few Pleistocene deposits. So most of our understanding about the evolutionary history of marsupials in Australia comes from fossils that have been unveiled in the middle of the country and the eastern states. There is one collection, the Tingamara fauna, which is in southeast Queensland. We'll be discussing that in the lecture, and that's quite an important fossil deposit for marsupials. And another one is the Riversley deposit, and that comes up at times as well. So kind of like the richest and longest records that we have for marsupials from the tertiary period are obviously coming from Queensland and South Australia and Northern Territory, as well as the Pleistocene deposits. So there is a problem in the evolutionary history of marsupials and in relation to the fossil record that we have. So there have been no Australian marsupial fossils found older than 55 million years ago, and no fossils have been found from that time until 26 million years ago. So there is a bit of a dark age in the marsupial fossil record, and I'll get back to that in a little while. But the marsupials in Australia are the product of this amazing evolutionary marathon. So as Australia kind of drifted free from Antarctica, it became this island laboratory where we saw a lot of the most unusual marsupials evolve. So they're actually the product of 25 million years of evolution. And this process began in China and then extended through Europe, the Americas, Antarctica, and then finally Australia. These marsupials have survived many challenges. So they've survived brutal bouts of climate change. They've survived global catastrophes, including meteorites and volcanic eruptions. They've lived and struggled with hostile competitors, including dinosaurs, predatory birds, and placental mammals. And then they've also survived the many challenges that have occurred due to our own species. So while marsupials have thrived, they've actually seen many other mammal groups that kind of began this journey kind of fall away. So I like to think of them as seasoned survivors of the worst challenges that our planet could have thrown at any group of mammals. So through the lecture, I have this geologic time interval just so that you can keep track of where I'm at when I'm talking about specific things. So the era, period, or epoch that I'm talking about will be indicated by this red bar on the side of the table. I don't need you to worry too much about remembering when specific things happened in terms of the ecologic time scale, but it's more just for a reference so that you know where we're at as we go through the lecture. So this continent called Laurasia, this is one of the two ancient supercontinents that first was produced by a split of an even larger supercontinent, which was Pangaea, and this occurred about 200 million years ago. So this supercontinent, Laurasia, comprised what we now know as North America, Greenland, Europe, and Asia. And so basically, Laurasia is where our first, or the ancestors of our marsupials first arose. And that occurred somewhere before 125 million years ago. So the oldest Megatherium that we know of was found in 2003 in China. The dispersal route of this early Megatherium is believed to have occurred between 115 and 100 million years ago, and this happened from Asia to North America, either through an eastward direction via the Bering Land Bridge, or westward via Europe and Greenland. So the timing and number of dispersal events from North to South America is quite controversial. And the suggestions that exist, or the hypotheses that exist, span a 24 million year window. This first Megatherium that has been discovered and described is this species here, which was actually a mouse-sized type mammal that was adapted to tree climbing. So there's fossils found in Antarctica that are distinctly South American in affinity. But the presence of two members of these early marsupials, which are the Microbiopteria, also indicate that there is affinity to Australian marsupials. So the Microbiopteria are a marsupial order that encompasses two families, and so it's represented by this one extant species that still lives in South America. So that is the colocolo opossum, which is pictured here. And there's these number of extinct species known from fossils in South America, in Western Antarctica, and in northeastern Australia. So the South American marsupials exhibit less diversity than the Australian marsupials. And this sort of reduction in diversity reflects that South American marsupials were largely restricted to carnivorous and omnivorous types of animals, and instead filling the herbivorous niches are the placentals, whereas in Australia, marsupials filled that herbivorous niche as well as carnivorous, and being omnivores. So Australian marsupials tend to span those three different dietary niches, whereas the South American marsupials are restricted more just to the carnivores. So in terms of the dispersal from South America to Australia, there is solid evidence that this occurred via Antarctica. However, the timing and direction of that dispersal is a bit contentious. There's actually three competing hypotheses that currently exist, and will continue to exist without any further evidence from newly found fossils. So the first hypothesis suggests that both South America, Antarctica, and Australia all shared a similar Megatherium fauna, with these extinctions then recurring that resulted in this kind of disjunct distribution of the ancient marsupials in South America and Australia. The second hypothesis suggests that the Microbiopteria evolved first in South America, and then one lineage dispersed across Antarctica to Australia. And then the third hypothesis, which is kind of a version of that, is that this Megatherium group dispersed from South America across Antarctica to Australia, which established a Microbiopteria clade there, and then subsequently evolved into another Australian order, with one of those then going back to South America to establish a South American radiation. So essentially coming across, evolving, and then going back. So currently, yes, those three hypotheses stand, and it's not clear yet which one is actually how it occurred. So for now, I'm just going to, from now on, I'm just going to sort of walk through the different time periods and discuss basically what was happening in the marsupial evolutionary history. And just reminding you that if you want to know where we're at in the geological time frame, just refer to the table here. So it was in the early Eocene that we have the presence of the earliest marsupials in Australia. And so they were discovered amongst the Tingomara, Queensland local fossil deposits, which, if you remember from my slide previously, that's in southeast Queensland. So it's here that the oldest marsupials were discovered in 55-million-year-old sediments. And these would have accumulated long before the separation from Antarctica. So this Tingomara local fauna have been dated to be 54.6 million years old, to be precise. And so there are marsupial fossils discovered there. So the oldest marsupial fossil was discovered and described simply from limited skeletal material, which includes a single molar, an incomplete ear bone, and then tarsal bones. So this just kind of indicates how, well, to me as a behavioural ecologist, how challenging paleo work must be. It's quite amazing that that paleontologists can describe whole species from these very few clues. And so just on the slide here, I've got the site of the Tingomara local fauna in Queensland. So the Tingomara fauna provides the only information available about Australia's marsupials between the early Cretaceous and the late Oligocene. And so what we get are these kind of two dark ages on either side of these fossil deposits. And this is unfortunate because it's believed that this kind of has obscured these fascinating events that occurred during early differentiation of our modern marsupials today. So why do we think that there was a lot going on during this time? Well, at the Paleocene and Eocene boundary, global temperatures were estimated to be quite a bit warmer than they were today, and warmer temperatures tend to lead to increased terrestrial biodiversity, including mammals. And then there was other climate change things occurring from the mid to late Eocene, which had a large global impact. So it's believed that these types of events are likely to have triggered a surge of diversification in Australian marsupials. So during the late Oligocene, Australia had now severed all land ties with Antarctica. It's drifting free and north towards Southeast Asia. So it's now an island continent. The environment, Australia was experiencing an icehouse phase. So temperatures were low, there was reduced rainfall, we were seeing increased seasonality, and in terms of the paleo vegetation, there was areas of open forest and woodland. So this kind of cooler icehouse phase environment tends to select for a decline in biodiversity. We do have some good late Oligocene marsupial fossil records, which are well represented by deposits in both central and northern Australia. And 3 of our 4 Australian marsupial orders actually have fossil representatives. But even that 4th one had probably differentiated by this stage. So the order Dasyuromorphia. So the modern species that belong to this order are quolls, dunarts, and the numbat. Within this order in the late Oligocene, thylacinids appeared to be the dominant carnivore. So thylacinids are an extinct family of carnivorous dog-like marsupials. And I'm sure you guys are all well aware of the very famous Tasmanian tiger. So this was the only species of thylacinid to survive to modern times, which we know sadly became extinct in captivity in 1936. But we've actually seen quite a few fossil taxa being described in the last 2 decades. So it seems that it was more than the Tassie tiger belonging to this family. So the Paramelamorphia, which includes our modern day bandicoots and bilbies. In the late Oligocene, there was only 6 named species, so quite low number have been described. And there's also, undescribed taxa for this period. So it seems like there's a lot more work to be done. There's this pretty cool family of short-snouted bandicoots or tube-nosed bandicoots, the Yarlidae. So they were abundant, but sadly they were eventually outcompeted by dasyurids later on. So you probably heard more about this in these bandicoots in Kenny's lecture. The Diprotodontia, which includes our koalas, wombats, possums, and kangaroos. They were actually quite diverse, with 17 or 25 families already existing in the late Oligocene. So these extinct families included sort of geographically and temporally diverse groups of quadrupedal lophodont browsers. They were mostly kind of like sheep size up to cow size. There was these cool marsupial tapirs that existed. So these were characteristic due to modifications in their crania that suggested that they had this kind of large, well-inverted, mobile trunk. They occur quite rarely among components of Australia's fossil assemblages, so it's been suggested this may indicate that they had more of a solitary lifestyle. So there was also a family, quite a diverse, primitive Diprotodontia family, the Balberidae. So these guys were described mostly from postcranial and cranial material, and they have a similar postcranial morphology to the modern musky rat kangaroo, which suggests the same quadrupedal gait and capacity to climb. So they have similar robust forelimbs, flexibility of the hind feet, and an opposable first digit. So with this information that you combine with these primitive Balberidae marsupials with what we see in modern-day musky rat kangaroos, we can understand when the evolution of this bipedal hopping gait, which is characteristic of modern kangaroos, occurred. And so it's believed that that probably occurred after the late Oligocene, early Miocene kind of interval. So the early Miocene, the fossils, marsupial fossils, are best known from Queensland, South Australia, and Tasmania. During this time, Australia was undergoing a greenhouse climate phase, so polar caps were melting, which is resulting in rising sea levels, the conditions were warm and humid. So rainforests were kind of becoming widespread across the top and the eastern side. It was getting more drier in the middle and more seasonal in the middle of the continent, but it was still more wetter than it is today. So consequently, we kind of saw high biodiversity during this time. And there was actually, in the early Miocene, the first appearance of many of the modern groups of marsupials, including our marsupial moles, many of the dasyurids, many of the possums, and the gliders. So the Dasyuromorphia, they were sort of moderately diverse during this period. There was both thylacinids and dasyurids present. So there was believed to be 4 to 6 thylacinid species coexisting. And so it's believed that this high diversity was driven by greater niche petitioning in the diverse rainforests. And this has been evident from fossils in the Riversley deposits. This sort of complements the low diversity of large dasyurids. So you sort of had high hylosanid diversity, low dasyurid diversity in the early Miocene, but then this becomes reversed later on. So the molecular divergence dates actually suggests that the ancestors of all the major dasyurid lineages had actually differentiated by 20 million years ago, which is during this period. And this is found to be consistent with the fossil records that we see. So the bandicoots has also increased markedly since the late Oligocene. So there's at least 5 new genera and 7 new species. But description of these taxa indicate that it's actually not referable to any of the modern bandicoot families. So the type of material that paleontologists are working with is represented here. So you can see that this species was actually described by teeth and 3 partial dentition bones, but they've managed to actually be able to tell that this was one of the short-snouted bandicoots that had a estimated body mass of 920 grams. The marsupial moles, so they are now appearing, the order that they belong to. So for a long time, it was only the extant species that we believed existed. So there are 2 extant species, the northern marsupial mole and the southern marsupial mole. But there was sort of this unexpected find where there was a distinct fossil in the early Miocene found in rainforest assemblages. And it was isolated to belong to the marsupial mole order. An analysis of the cranial bones revealed, the postcranial bones revealed that the forelimbs were likely specialised for digging. So it's believed that the digging kind of behaviour that has evolved in marsupial moles possibly arose first in rainforest species as an adaptation for burrowing through leaf litter or sort of mossy material on the rainforest floor. And then obviously subsequently it then obviously became digging in the arid regions of the continent. So this order is quite cool. So there's no existing species belonging to the Eucarpariodontia. So there's actually only been 2 species from the early to mid-Miocene described. They are quite unique. So as you'll see here in this picture, they possess this greatly enlarged. They possess greatly enlarged in sizes, and they have this extremely V-shaped cheek teeth and cheekbone as well. So it's believed that this has something to do with obviously how they feed, and this highly specialized crania is similar to what we see in striped possums, so the existing striped possums. And so the striped possums actually feed on wood-boring larvae. So they have these enlarged incisors to kind of gouge into the trees, and then they'll extract the larvae with a elongated digit. So if the striped possums and these Yellowcapariodontia species lived at the same time, it's likely that they were filling the same niche and therefore competed with each other. So the Diprotodontia, so this is our koalas, wombats, possums, and kangaroos. Their rainforest environments in the early Miocene triggered an increase in possum diversity, which isn't surprising. In contrast to this, there was decreased diversity in the large body forms of the Diprotodonts. There were some sort of ancient koalas around, and these are believed to have similar auditory areas to the modern species, which includes this kind of enlarged auditory bullae. And an enlarged bullae functions for increasing the perception of low frequency sounds. So it's been speculated that the kind of sedentary nature of koalas, and then how they give off these loud, frequent vocalizations, probably actually originated in the early Miocene. And so this leads to the question whether lower densities within those closed forests required low frequency vocalizations to achieve long distance communication. So just an evolutionary pressure there on communication processes that sort of persist now in modern species. The most diverse macropodids, which are a family of the Diprotodontids, were the bellbarats. So these guys had very short feet. They had well-developed opposable toes on the front foot, on the hind foot, and these powerful forelimbs. So is evidence there that they galloped and they didn't hop. And they didn't much resemble what we would consider to be a modern kangaroo. So there was sort of one species that was quite extraordinary. They had these enlarged upper canines in the males. It's kind of pictured here. This is similar to what is found today in some small deer species. So it's actually been hypothesized that these teeth were used as a display and defense weapon in male-male conflict. That's the function in these small deer species. And, you know, so in terms of male-male conflict today, in modern day kangaroos, we see that they obviously use their hind legs, but that obviously came after the bipedal hopping. So potentially a different trait here used in male-male conflict in these early kangaroos. There were low diversity in carnivorous kangaroos. So meat-eating kangaroos, and basically these types of kangaroos during the early Miocene were represented by a single but very common species. Very kangaroo-like kangaroos. So it suggests that they were predatory and carnivorous, or omnivorous with a fondness for meat. And this is based on the size and shape of these kind of saw-shaped premolars. And they had these sort of dagger-like lower incisors that was believed to be able to stab their food. And with these sort of saw-shaped premolars, it would have been quite efficient in dismantling and consuming small to medium-sized prey. They were certainly quadrupedal with very powerful forelimbs, so still not hopping. Okay, moving on to the mid-Miocene. So the marsupial fauna for this this epoch is, or sub-epoch, is from deposits of the Riversley and Bollock Creek deposits. So here we're now shifting to a cooler, dry conditions. For Australia, there was a collision with Southeast Asia, which severed the Indian Pacific Ocean connection. So there was a resulted lowered sea levels, lower temperature, and rainfall declines, and believed to be then reduced environmental predictability. So increased unpredictability in the conditions. The drying of Australia was compounded also by the emergence of highlands in the New Guinea, and also the increasing height of our eastern dividing range. And what we saw then is this sort of profound change in vegetation in the centre of the continent. So rainforests were now being replaced by open forests and woodlands, with your rainforest being retracted to the margins. So there was a major faunal overturn characterised by a decline in biodiversity, and we saw extinction of entire families, but then radiation in others in response to this kind of opening up of the vegetation. So the Dasyuromorphia, thylacinids continued their reign as the dominant marsupial carnivores, so they increased in diversity. In contrast to this, there's a lack of diversity evident among the Dasyurids, so the record is poor, but it's evident that the radiation occurred sometime between the mid-Miocene and later on. And again, just reiterating the point that the limited material that paleontologists have to work with, and sometimes they can't quite fit a fossil. So this is an example here of a Dasyuromorph that just has these two pieces of dental material. And so that's got paleontologists stumped, and as such, it's not been, this species hasn't been able to be confidently placed within any known family. The bandicoots are diverse and abundant. Continuing on, so there's new species arising, including this tube-nosed bandicoot. The Yale Kappa parodontia. So the common species, colloquially referred to as Cohen's Thingodonta, disappeared, and there was a greater appearance of a less abundant species. So this sort of younger species differs from Cohen's Thingodonta by being slightly larger, having an additional premolar. It's actually the last known representative of the order, so the last of its kind. And so whatever niche these very interesting marsupials occupied, so they've been referred to as marsupial woodpeckers. It seems to have disappeared with them. If they were competing with striped possums, perhaps this was the point at which they lost, and the striped possums continued on. So this is a modern day common striped possum, and just pointing out here that enlarged digit that I referred to earlier that they use to extract larvae from inside trees. So the herbivorous Diprodontia possum species are abundant and form a large component of the rainforest assemblages. So the larger terrestrial Diprodontids during the Middle Miocene began to diversify, and this is, this is likely due to the opening up of the closed forest. And many of these groups are then starting to demonstrate an increase in body size, which is likely in response to the reduction in quality of most of the abundant food plants that are available. There's a continued decline in koala and wombat diversity. There's also a diversity in the decline of what we refer to as the marsupial lions. So this is an extinct family of marsupials, meat-eating marsupials. These guys had specialised dentition that allowed them to kill larger prey. And so they were seen as occupying that really high trophic level as peak predators. There were some smaller species which were more like cat dog size and likely to be arboreal. The smaller species, so the microlions, had been lost by now, but there was this new species that emerged, which is pretty much a fairly vicious looking marsupial. So it kind of had these vicious stabbing lower incisors and, shearing elongate premolars for consuming meat efficiently, killing prey and consuming meat efficiently. So I talk more about the marsupial lions in the next lecture. So the Diprodontids, they are increasing in diversity due to this opening up of the forests. We start getting herbivorous marsupials that are referred to as giant wombats. And so this clade of giant wombats existed from the Oligocene through to the Pleistocene. The earliest known species weren't too huge. They're about the size of sheep. And the fact that they sort of exhibit high abundance in many of the deposits suggests that they may have been social and moved together in mobs like we see modern-day kangaroos. There's this really well-preserved population of a specific species pictured there. So the deposits include material of pouch young up through to mature adults. So this kind of level of information is been really important in sort of piecing together the ontogenetic variation. And so it allows for just a really good analysis of a fossil marsupial population. There was a decline of the ancient Balbarids, corresponding to this sort of rise of modern macropodids. And so macropodids, so this includes like your kangaroos and wallabies, suggests that there's molecular divergent dates that suggest that there was extensive diversification of macropodids in the Middle Miocene around 12 million years ago. Once again, coinciding with this opening up of the forest and the continuing cooling and drying of the continent. There's a mid-Miocene macropodid subfamily that specifically shows adaptations to a more open forested environment. So the development of a completely molar-based browsing dentition, and it's evident that this members of this subfamily probably showed a more bipedal hopping gait and less quadrupedal. Yep. So that's where I'm going to leave it for now. The next lecture we pick up at the late Miocene and talk more about the ancient marsupials that existed during those times up to the modern day marsupials. And we also cover more about the role that humans had in the demise of the giant marsupial megafauna. So stay tuned for that one. Thank you.